I was told this was the correct window for benefits verification.
Without a claim number, you're just a name, ma'am. You'll have to go to intake, window 12. Get a number and get in the queue.
The woman's voice was firm, controlled, yet a fine tremor of frustration ran beneath the surface, a vibration only detectable if you were listening for it. She stood before the thick, scuffed pane of plexiglass, her reflection a hazy distortion next to the taped-up notices and faded government posters. The air in the Veterans Affairs waiting room was a familiar cocktail of stale coffee, industrial disinfectant, and the faint collective sigh of patience worn thin. A television bolted to the wall played a news channel on mute, captions crawling silently across images of a world that felt a million miles away from this beige linoleum-floored purgatory. Men and women, young and old, sat scattered across the rows of unforgiving plastic chairs, each lost in their own private battle with time and paperwork. Some stared at their phones, others at the scuffed floor. A few just stared into the middle distance, their faces impassive masks honed by years of waiting. The woman before the window, dressed in a simple but well-cut navy blue pantsuit, looked jarringly out of place, like a freshly printed page dropped into a worn, dog-eared book. She didn't have the practiced slump of the regulars, the almost meditative stillness that came from surrendering to the bureaucratic tide. From a chair against the far wall, Walter Finch watched the exchange. He wasn't staring, not really. His observation was a low-frequency hum, a background process that had been running for the better part of 70 years. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way she held her leather portfolio like a shield. He saw the clerk behind the glass, a young man whose expression was a perfect flat plane of indifference. The clerk's eyes flicked over a screen, his fingers tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on his keyboard. "Do you have a claim number, ma'am?" he asked, his voice muffled by the glass and a profound lack of interest. "No," the woman replied, her control slipping another notch. "I don't have a claim number. My husband's file is complex. I was assured by Senator Albright's office that someone here would be expecting me, that I could handle this in person." The clerk blinked slowly. The mention of a senator's name produced not a flicker of urgency, but a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. It was the wrong thing to say. In here, pulling rank was like trying to swim in sand. It only made you sink faster. "Without a claim number or a file reference, you're just a name, ma'am. You'll have to go to intake, window 12. Get a number and get in the queue." He gestured vaguely to his left, a gesture that encompassed the entire chaotic room, and turned back to his screen, the conversation officially over. The woman stood there for a moment, stunned into silence. Her authority, so absolute in every other corner of her life, had just evaporated against a wall of institutional apathy. She looked lost. Walter pushed himself to his feet. The movement was slow, deliberate, a careful negotiation with a left knee that had held a grudge against a piece of shrapnel for 50 years. He wore faded denim jeans and a plain gray sweatshirt, the kind of clothes that rendered a man invisible. His face was a roadmap of long years. His white hair was cut short and neat, a habit that had never left him. He approached the woman not with haste, but with a calm, steady pace that parted the anxious energy of the room like a boat's prow through still water. He didn't touch her or startle her. He simply came to a stop a respectful few feet away, and spoke in a low, gentle voice that was somehow easier to hear than the clerk's amplified drone. "He's not wrong," Walter said, his eyes on the dismissive clerk, not her. "But he's not right either." The woman turned, startled. She looked at him, her gaze sharp, analytical, taking in the worn clothes, the slight limp, the age in his face. It was the look of someone accustomed to assessing threats and assets in a single glance. Walter met her gaze without flinching, his own eyes a pale, clear blue, full of a quiet, unshakable calm. "There's a different way to do this," he continued, giving a slight nod toward an empty pair of chairs. "If you've got the time." For a moment she hesitated, a flicker of suspicion in her eyes. But then she looked back at the plexiglass wall, at the endless sea of chairs, and the fight seemed to drain out of her. She gave a single, sharp nod. "I have the time." He led her to the chairs, not the ones in the main waiting area, but a smaller, quieter set, tucked away in an alcove near a dusty, non-functional water fountain. The first thing you have to understand, Walter began, settling into his seat with a soft sigh, is that this place isn't a straight line. It's a circle. You try to push through, it just sends you right back where you started. He gestured with a hand that was clean but deeply creased, the knuckles slightly swollen with arthritis. Yelling, mentioning names, that's pushing. The folks behind that glass, they get pushed all day. After a while, they just learn to lean back. The woman, Catherine, listened intently. She'd received dozens of briefings on the VA's systemic issues, read binders full of statistics and reports on funding shortfalls and patient wait times. But none of it had communicated the ground-level reality like this old man's simple, unadorned truth. "My husband," she said, her voice softer now, "was Colonel David Ramsey. He passed 6 months ago. The paperwork for his survivor benefits, it's been a nightmare. Lost forms, conflicting information. They're telling me a service record from his time in Panama is missing. Without it, the claim is stalled." Walter nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "David Ramsey," he repeated softly. 7th Special Forces Group, wasn't he? Mid-80s. Catherine's carefully composed expression faltered. A genuine crack appeared in her armor. "Yes," she breathed. "How did you know that?" Walter offered a small, sad smile. "I was a medic with the 82nd Airborne. We worked with the 7th a few times down there. Different operations, same jungle. You don't forget the names." The shared history, however tangential, shifted the air between them. She was no longer just a frustrated citizen, and he was no longer just a random old man. They were part of the same tribe, bound by a past written in sweat and sacrifice. "The paper files from that era are a mess," Walter explained, his tone becoming more practical, like a seasoned guide explaining a treacherous path. "A lot of it was never properly digitized. The clerk out there, he's looking at a screen. If the screen says no record, then for him, there is no record. He doesn't have the authority, or probably the inclination, to dig any deeper." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "But Joyce, over in Records Administration, she knows where the old archive boxes are stored. She's been here 30 years. She remembers when files were actual paper." He pointed with his chin toward a hallway at the other end of the building. "Her office is down there. It doesn't have a window. You have to know to knock on the door. Room 113B. Catherine stared at him, a dawning understanding on her face. This was a system within the system, a hidden network of knowledge and personal relationships that bypassed the official broken channels. It was a language she didn't speak, but this man was a fluent interpreter. "Will she see me?" Catherine asked, the question laced with the disbelief of someone used to having appointments made for her weeks in advance. "She will," Walter said with quiet confidence. "But not yet. She takes her lunch at 11:30 sharp. The best time to catch her is 11:15. She's winding down. She's more inclined to listen. We've got about an hour." They sat in a comfortable silence for a few minutes, the cacophony of the main room a muted backdrop to their small island of calm. Walter seemed perfectly content to just sit, his hands resting on his knees, his breathing even and slow. He possessed a stillness that Catherine found both foreign and fascinating. Her life was a blur of motion, of scheduled calls and urgent briefings, of moving from one crisis to the next. This man seemed to inhabit time differently, to treat it not as an adversary to be conquered, but as a medium to be navigated. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked, the question genuine. She was used to people helping her because of who she was, what she could do for them. This was different. This was pure, unprompted kindness. Walter turned his head and looked at her, his pale blue eyes seeming to see right through the expensive suit and the powerful title she kept hidden. "Because you're here," he said simply, as if it were the most obvious answer in the world. "And because of Colonel Ramsey, no one who wore the uniform or loved someone who did should have to fight a war over paperwork. The real fight was supposed to be over." The simplicity of his statement struck her with the force of a physical blow. It was the entire mission of her department, the sacred promise the nation made to its soldiers, distilled into 2 perfect sentences by a man in a faded sweatshirt. He understood the why of her job better than many of the generals she commanded. He then told her about the waiting room, not as a place of despair, but as a community. He pointed out a young Marine with a fresh haircut and a rigid posture, nervously bouncing his leg. First time here, you can see it in his eyes. He still thinks an order is an order. He'll learn. He nodded toward an older woman knitting quietly in the corner. Her husband was in Vietnam. She comes with him to every appointment, holds his hand when the doctor talks. She's been his rock for 50 years. He spoke of the people not as cases or claim numbers, but as stories, each with their own weight and dignity. He was the unofficial historian of this waiting room, the keeper of its unwritten lore. As he spoke, Catherine felt the layers of her professional identity begin to peel away. In this room, she wasn't the fourth most powerful person in the country's military hierarchy. She was just David's widow, trying to secure the benefits he had earned, lost in the very system she was supposed to command. The humility of the experience was bracing, like a plunge into cold water. Walter checked the simple leather-banded watch on his wrist. 11:10, he announced. Time for a strategic advance. He rose slowly, and she followed, her portfolio now feeling less like a shield and more like a useless burden. He led her not down the main corridor, but through a side door she hadn't even noticed, into a quieter, less trafficked hallway. The noise of the waiting room faded behind them. They found room 113B, an unassuming wooden door with a small, stenciled number on it. Walter knocked twice, a soft, polite rap. After a moment, the door opened a crack, and a woman with tired eyes and a formidable pile of gray hair peered out. "Walter," she said, her stern expression softening into a weary smile, "don't tell me they lost your paperwork again." "Not mine today, Joyce," he said, his voice warm. "This is Catherine. She's the widow of Colonel David Ramsey, 7th Group. They're telling her his Panama records are missing." Joyce's eyes shifted to Catherine, her gaze shrewd but not unkind. She looked at the woman's anxious face, then back at Walter's steady one. His presence was a voucher, a stamp of approval in this place. "Panama," Joyce sighed, rubbing her temples. "That whole operation was a filing disaster. Half of it's probably in a damp box in the basement archives. Give me what you've got." Catherine, fumbling for a moment, handed over a thin folder. Joyce took it, her fingers flipping through the pages with an expert speed that spoke of decades spent wrestling with bureaucracy. "Ramsey, David." "Got it. Okay, leave it with me. I can't promise anything today, but I'll go on a safari down to the archives this afternoon." She looked at Catherine directly. "Walter here is a good man. You're in good hands." And with that, she closed the door, leaving them standing in the quiet hallway. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was more progress than Catherine had made in 6 months of phone calls and certified letters. It was a foothold. As they walked back toward the main waiting area, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude that was almost overwhelming. "I don't know how to thank you, Walter," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You've done more for me in an hour than an entire senator's office has in months." Walter just shrugged, a small, self-effacing gesture. "It's not about who you know," he said. "It's about knowing how and being patient. This place rewards patience." Just as they re-entered the main room, a man in a dark, impeccably tailored suit who had been sitting in the back, trying to blend in, stood up and moved quickly toward them. He had the unmistakable bearing of a Secret Service agent or a high-level aide, alert, disciplined, his eyes constantly scanning. He had been giving her space, as per her instructions, but his anxiety was now palpable. He approached and spoke in a low, urgent tone, his focus entirely on her. "Madam Secretary," he said, his voice a tight whisper, "we're running behind for the briefing at the Pentagon. We need to leave." The title hung in the air between them, electric and transformative. Madam Secretary. The chaotic noise of the waiting room seemed to recede, creating a pocket of stunned silence around the three of them. The young clerk at the window, who had been watching them, froze with his hand halfway to his mouth. The young Marine stopped bouncing his leg. Everyone who heard it turned to look. Catherine closed her eyes for a brief second, her incognito mission having come to an abrupt and public end. Walter stood perfectly still. He looked at the anxious aide in the suit, then at Catherine. He didn't look shocked or betrayed. He just looked thoughtful. He processed the information with the same calm deliberation he applied to everything else. His eyes traced the lines of her face, seeing not the powerful official, but the tired, grieving widow he'd been helping all morning. The pieces clicked into place not with a crash, but with a quiet, logical snap. The expensive but understated suit, the precise, articulate way she spoke, the initial frustration born not of entitlement, but of an expectation that systems should simply work. Catherine Ramsey, the new Secretary of Defense. He'd seen her picture in the news. He finally turned to her, and a slow, wry smile touched his lips. "Well," he said, his voice still quiet, still gentle, betraying no hint of intimidation. "I suppose that's a name Joyce in records might recognize." The sheer, unadulterated understatement of it was so profound, so perfectly Walter, that Catherine let out a short, surprised laugh. The tension broke. Her aide looked utterly bewildered by the exchange. The VA hospital director was now power-walking across the room, his face pale, flanked by two equally panicked-looking administrators. They had clearly been alerted by her security detail. Catherine held up a hand, halting the director's approach. She turned her full attention back to Walter, her expression one of deep, undisguised respect. "Walter," she said, her voice clear and carrying in the now silent room. "My name is Catherine Ramsey. You were right about my husband, and you were right about this place." She gestured to the room, to the people watching them, to the entire, flawed, frustrating, essential system he had navigated so gracefully. "I came here today without announcement because I wanted to see the reality of it for myself. I wanted to see what our veterans actually experience." Her gaze met his, and there was a bond between them that transcended rank and station. "You've shown me more than I could have ever learned from 1,000 briefing binders. You've shown me the problems, but you've also shown me the solution." The hospital director was hovering nearby, looking like he might spontaneously combust. "Madam Secretary," he stammered, "I am so sorry for any inconvenience you experienced." Catherine turned a cool gaze on him. "The only inconvenience, Director, is that men like Walter Finch have to create their own informal systems to get the care they were promised. The inconvenience is that a hero's widow has to rely on the kindness of a stranger to get a simple question answered." She turned back to Walter. "I'm not offering you a commendation or a medal, Walter. You've earned more than enough of those, I'm sure. I'm offering you a job." Walter blinked, the first sign of genuine surprise he'd shown all day. "A job, ma'am? I'm a little old for a new line of work." "Not a job," she corrected herself, a smile touching her lips. "A post. I'm creating a new advisory position, effective immediately. The senior veteran liaison to the Secretary of Defense. It won't be in Washington. Your post will be right here, and in rooms just like this all over the country. Your job will be to sit in these chairs, to talk to these people, and then to talk to me. Your only duty is to tell me the truth, Walter. The unvarnished, ground-level truth of what needs to be fixed. You'll have a direct line to my personal office. No clerks, no windows, no queues." The entire room was listening, rapt. For the first time, hope seemed to cut through the stale, recycled air. It wasn't about one woman getting her benefits sorted out anymore. It was about all of them. Walter looked around the room, at the faces of the men and women he knew so well. He saw their struggles, their resilience, their quiet dignity. He looked back at the most powerful person in the United States military, who was waiting for his answer with the genuine humility of a student before a respected teacher. He straightened his shoulders, the movement slow but sure, his posture reclaiming a hint of the disciplined soldier he had once been. "Yes, ma'am," Walter Finch said, his voice steady and clear. "I believe I can do that."